Hello and welcome back to the Sporting Fun podcast. Today I speak about the fullbacks in the NRL. Fullbacks have always been an integral part to teams in rugby league, and most teams that have had continued success have usually had good quality fullbacks, and you usually tend to need someone at the back that can take pressure off the halves. And so it mixes up the attack, and they can usually help teams be successful. And it goes right back to the earliest days of rugby league in Australia. Like, for example, in what was then known as the NSWRL competition, which is the precursor to the NRL, what is now known as the NRL. The Roosters were the first team to win 3 premierships in a row, which was 1911 to 1913, and they the fullback they had is actually in his honour is actually the player of the who the player of the year is named for. The Met Delia medal is actually given because the person that's named over is the fullback, the Roosters fullback, Daly Messenger. They actually named the player of the year after him. He was that, without Daly Messenger, the Roosters would have struggled to win those 3 premierships, and he was that good. And in South Sydney in the 50s, they won 4 premierships. Clive Churchill was their fullback, and they named the player of the match in the grand final after him. He was a dominant fullback. And the Dragons, for the years that they won the 4 of the 11 years that they won the 11 straight, they had Graham Langland, who was also considered one of the greatest fullbacks of all time. And as time goes on, the role of the fullbacks become more and more important. Every top team throughout the years have always had a good, solid to great fullback, and while the teams near the bottom tend to have, not always, this is not always, but they seem to have players playing out of position at fullback, or the fullbacks are not up to the level of the other teams. The first fullback I'll speak about is Tom Trbojevic. Last year he won the Dally M Player of the Year, and despite only playing 15 games, he missed several games through injury last year, but he still managed to win it. He's by far Manly's best player, and without him last year, Des Hasler's job looked shaky despite starting a new deal at the start of the year. After they lost 4 straight games, their opening 4 games last year, they weren't playing well. A lot of question marks were over Westropp-Evans and that. But yeah, he came back, dominated, got them to a top 4 position, got them to the prelims. And yeah, so they actually had a very successful season last year. Personally, I think he's the best fullback in the game right now. And if he can get his body right and he keeps getting better, which he seems to do each year, he seems to be getting better. He seems to be playing a few more games every year. He'll go down as one of the great fullbacks of all time, and he may even become an immortal if he keeps improving and keeps fit. It'll be interesting to see if he does win a premiership at Manly, because he is such a great player, and he's someone that can really take the team forward. Daly Evans and Kieran Foran need to take some of the pressure off them, because they Manly have become a little bit one-dimensional with it's a bit like the under-12s where you just give it to the big kid. Manly just give the ball to Turbo and they just say, Turbo, you do something. So if Sherry Evans and Kieran Foran can take some pressure off them, like they did against Knights when they won 30-6, with Turbo out injured, they will be able to, they could be a contender. They could be a little bit of a, dark horse. They could, for the premiership this year, they could potentially win it. If results go their way. I can't see them beating Melbourne, but you never know. They could beat them in the finals, or if Melbourne are on the other side of the draw, they could potentially cause an upset against someone like Penrith. And the other thing is that I'll say about Turbo is he's able to adapt to any situation and position. Originally he's been played on the wing for New South Wales, which a lot of people weren't surprised at. But then Brad Fittler selected him in the centres, and Tedesco at fullback for New South Wales, and a lot of people were scratching their heads why Brad Fittler did that, because a lot of people were concerned he would end up a bit like Clint Gutherson, where he would get caught out in the get caught out in the centres defensively, and it could reduce his impact and attack. But he ended up being the best player throughout the series, and because Fittler kind of let him play this roving role, almost like a second fullback, so it caused a lot of problems for Queensland and their defence, because they had they had Tedesco, Turbo, and James Tedesco, who I'll speak about in a minute, and Latrell Mitchell, who I will also talk about, all linking up, and the defence Queensland defence couldn't handle it, and it has changed the game, because the Roosters started doing it with Joey Manu, where he doesn't always do it, but, occasionally Joey Manu's doing that roving role as well. He's officially a centre, but he's doing, at times he does a bit of a roving role, and at club level, and he's causing, when he's playing with, the New South Wales fullback again, James Tedesco, so where Joey Manu at club level is kind of doing the Trbojevic at the Roosters, and it's caused a lot of defensive problems for a lot of teams, and Joey Manu has really done that role. So you can see some clubs like the Roosters adopting what Brad Fittler did with Trbojevic at the Origin level, and it'll be interesting. Like I said, you can see there that he's actually changed the game. And then that leads me into a person that I mentioned a couple of times when Trbojevic's, when I was talking about Tom Trbojevic, James Tedesco, the Roosters fullback and captain, Australian fullback, also a New South Wales captain. He's a bit of an interesting one, because everyone knew how good he was when he was at the Tigers, but they didn't know how good he was until he went to the Roosters in 2018, and straight away he took control and became one of the game's premier players. He just, along with Latrell Mitchell and Luke Keary, they just destroyed that year, and he won the Dally M medal. Since then he's also won the Player of the Series. I believe that was in State of Origin Player of the Series. I believe the 2019 series, and he's just gone from strength to strength since he's come to the Roosters. He has improved his passing game, because everyone knew how good his running game was. When he was at the Tigers, he had a phenomenal running game, but he was not known for his passing game. But over the last few years, since he's been at the Roosters, he's really improved that passing, and he's become really a dominant playmaker. The one thing that he does need to improve, in my opinion, is that because they had so many injuries last year, he kind of had to do it, but he was overplaying his hand last year, and it worked last year simply because the Roosters had so many players out with injury and suspension, but it's continued on to into this year with Luke Keary and Sam Walker's got the experience now, got a little bit of experience, and So he just needs to reel that back in a little bit, and if he gets back to what he was doing in 2018 and 2019, where he was linking with those in 2018 and 2019, he was linking with Keary and Cronk, and if he can do that, get back to what he was doing back then, this time with Walker and Keary instead of Cronk and Keary, he will be able to. The Roosters will really see that, and they'll get back to being a dominant team. Like the last 2 years, they've looked a little bit tired towards the back end of the year after winning back-to-back in 2018 and 2019. But if he can get back to what he was doing, let Keary and Walker run the show, and he runs off the back of that, the Roosters could be a big chance of winning the premiership again this year. And Again, talking about Tedesco being at the Tigers leads me into, before going to the Roosters, leads me into my next player that I'm going to speak about, Ryan Papenhuyzen. And people going, where's the link between the Tigers, Tedesco and Papenhuyzen? Well, the Tigers actually wanted to keep, they let Ryan Papenhuyzen go to try to keep Tedesco, and then Tedesco ended up leaving. So Ryan Papenhuyzen, because they thought, Papenhuyzen, they didn't want to hold Papenhuyzen back, so they thought they could keep Tedesco. They let Papenhuyzen go, did the right thing by him, and then Tedesco ended up leaving. But yeah, Papenhuyzen came in as a replacement at Melbourne to replace the great Billy Slater. So he had a lot of he had very, very big shoes to fill. But you could say he's filled them. He's at Melbourne. He's just gone from strength to strength, and he's fitted in well there. He got the 2020 Clive Churchill medal, which a lot of people thought it was actually going to go to Cam Smith, but he when Melbourne won that premiership, but he actually went to Ryan Papenhuyzen, and he's been a big part of why Melbourne have been so consistent over the years, the last couple of years, where they've been able to stay at the top, because a lot of people thought when, Cooper Cronk left for the Roosters at the end of 2017, Billy Slater retired at the end of 2018, they thought, the 2018 season when Cronk wasn't there was going to be a dip, but they made the grand final. Admittedly, they lost, but, they still managed to make the grand final. They thought after 2019, after Slater retired, that they were going to have a dip, but, Papenhuyzen just slotted right in, and, they just keep, dominating, and then they obviously won the premiership 2 years ago. Had a pretty solid season last year, made the prelim finals, had the minor premiership, and he's been a big part of that. Why they keep doing that? They keep just, he keeps going from strength to strength, and he also plays a role off the field as well, because last year he missed a lot of the season through concussion and other issues, but he helped Nico Hines play, who's now at Cronulla playing halfback. But he was Nico Hines was fullback last year for a large part of last year at Melbourne, and Nico Hines, he helped Nico Hines, and they just keep going strength to strength, and I bet the Tigers are regretting letting him go, because they they haven't made the finals since 2011, and Papenhuyzen has played the finals every year that he's been a regular first grader at Melbourne, and he's Clive Churchill winner, premiership winner. So he's just going, and he's in talks to play for New South Wales now. He's going to struggle to get in simply because they're, with Tedesco and Trbojevic there, he's going to be struggling to make the fullback role, get named at fullback. But he's a dominant player. He's such a good player, and if Tedesco's ever out, you'd put Turbo. I reckon you'd almost keep Turbo and Latrell Mitchell in the centres, and you could almost bring Ryan Pappenhausen in because he's that good a player, and he won't let the team. He's not going to let the team down, and because he's performed in grand finals. The pressure won't overawe him. The one position that they could do, if they do have Tedesco, Turbo, and Mitchell in. The one position he could do is play as a bench player and come in, having him as a kind of roving lock or something, having him just go side to side, being an extra playmaker, being a nuisance of himself. Because he has got good ball skills and he does that, that catch and pass. But he's probably his biggest asset is that he's evasive, fast and evasive. A lot of players, they're fast in a straight line, but they're not very evasive. They're, when they change direction, they're quite slow when not very quick when they change direction. But Ryan Pappenhausen was one of the few, and that's one of the things that Turbo is also very good at. He's quick at changing direction, and he can swerve. He swerves very quickly, and which makes him very hard to tackle. And that's why so many teams find, and he's also very strong, which makes teams struggle to tackle him. He causes so many problems for the opposition. And I reckon he's already got one premiership. I reckon, if Craig Bellamy stays there, he could, go on to win, who knows, he could win another two or three premierships. He could have, 3 or 4 by the end of his career. And then moving on to a team that has been at the top of the table, and they don't have he's not a flashy fullback. He's not he's not in the same mould as a Tedesco or a Travojevic or a Pappenhausen, but he's, he's one player that actually gets overshadowed, which is very rare for a top team to have their fullback that's usually overshadowed and then that doesn't get spoken about much, and that's the Penrith fullback, Dylan Edwards. He gets overshadowed by other players in his team like Nathan Cleary and Jerome Leoi and Isaiah Yeo and these blokes and the and Stephen Crichton, and you could go through the whole team. And he gets Brian Tyler, who's another one at Penrith. So he gets Dylan Edwards because they have so many quality players at Penrith. He gets overshadowed, but you can see if you actually just follow him, if you don't listen so much to the commentary and actually watch him, you realize how important he is to that team. Like, he takes a lot of pressure off, Jerome Luai and, Nathan Cleary in the halves that, he also helps with the direction. And the thing with him is, like all good quality fullbacks, he's always right where you want him to be. He's always right there. And they often talk about how well, the commentators always talk about how well Stephen Crichton runs off and he links up with Luai and Cleary, which he does. He's like, Stephen Crichton's a phenomenal player. He's one of the, best centers in the game. But they forget that quite often, Dylan Edwards is also helping him there as well. And, Dylan Edwards, helps a lot with showing how good Stephen Crichton actually is. And the thing that he also doesn't get talking about with Dylan Edwards is his defence. Like, there's quite a few times last season, or the last couple of seasons, where the opposition have made a half break down the wing, and they've been maybe knocked off balance, and they're about to regain their balance and run along. They either will run the length, or run 40 metres upfield, and he's right there to chop them. And he's just there and finishes off the tackle. And, people have been speaking about how, potentially Penrith should get rid of Dylan Edwards and put Stephen Crichton at fullback. But, people forget that if that had happened, Dylan Edwards didn't play in that grand final last year. Stephen Crichton would have been playing fullback, which means they would have had a different centre, which you never know. Stephen Crichton wouldn't have taken that intercept that won Penrith the game, where he took that intercept of Cody Walker and run in and scored. Maybe another centre wouldn't have read it like Crichton would have, and wouldn't have taken that intercept, and then South would have gone on to win that premiership. So, there's little things like that where, and you can speak, Penrith always talk about how, he doesn't get the accolades, but he's an important cog in the wheel. He's an important factor in their team. And, they probably wouldn't have even made the grand final last year if it wasn't for Dylan Edwards, let alone win the premiership. And then moving on to another player, young gun, Reece Walsh. He is, one that's got away from the Broncos. He's a terrific buy for the Warriors because, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck left the Warriors for New Zealand Rugby. Like Pappenhausen, he's fast, he's evasive, and which makes up for his small size. He's not an overly big guy, and with that speed and evasiveness, he can get away from opposition players. He's got good ball skills, and he's been someone that has really stepped up for the Warriors since Tuivasa-Sheck has left, because Tuivasa-Sheck left a huge hole when he left. And it was easy, I don't think you can't be the same, you can't be the same as Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, because if you try to be like him too much, you're going to just struggle. But he's someone that, has really stepped into a role that was always going to be difficult, and, shoes that have been difficult to fill, but, but he filled them, and straight away people were talking about him potentially playing for Queensland last year, despite only playing a small number of games. But that didn't materialize. It didn't happen. And I think it was for his own good that it didn't happen as well, because how many times have you seen a bloke that just gets thrown into the deep end, and they just struggle, and there obviously there's exceptions to the rule. Brad Fittler got thrown in at 18, 19. Israel Folau got thrown in when he was about 18 or 19. So did Greg Inglis. So there's always exceptions to the rules, but to the rule where a young bloke gets thrown in, but quite often blokes get thrown into rep footy and they're just not ready. But and it just overawes them, and then their skill level just goes down. So I think and they never reach their full ability. So I think it probably did Reece Walsh a bit of a favour not getting picked for Queensland last year. I think it was a good thing that he was around the setup though. So you can see how he saw how blokes prepared, and he'll continue to grow, and you'll probably eventually see him play as a bench player. With Kalen Ponga being there, he'll probably be a bench player maybe. Playing that 14 jersey. You never know. He might eventually end up overtaking Ponga, and and he comes on and just destroys teams. So I reckon he could be someone that, I reckon he'll eventually play for Queensland, but just give him a year or two to really grow, and then eventually I reckon he'll be a top quality fullback. He'll be, wherever he ends up. There's talk that he might go to the Dolphins, but wherever he ends up, whether, and wherever he plays, whether it's for Queensland, the Warriors, or if he goes elsewhere, he'll be, he'll always be a dominant player, and he'll hopefully continue to grow and dominates the league for years to come. And talking about Queensland sides, as much as it's not Brisbane, I'm going to speak about the Cowboys. And these are one of the teams that they seem to struggle with their fullback. Like I was saying before, they were struggling with their fullback position. They're playing blokes out of position. They played Scott Drinkwater, Hamaso Tabai Fidel, sorry about pronunciations, I'm hopeless, and Valentine Holmes, who are all fantastic players in their respective positions, but they aren't fullbacks. Scott Drinkwater is a half, and he played very well the last year in the halves. He's been okay at fullback, but you can see he's a little bit lost there, and he's not exactly sure of himself at fullback, and he's denting his confidence. He's basically playing as a third half rather than a fullback. He's not really. I know fullbacks these days play a little bit like that, but he's not playing like a traditional fullback, like a turbo. It's a bit different. I think when they got beaten against the Roosters, admittedly controversial refereeing, but when he comes against someone like Penrith or the Melbourne Storm, it's going to be struggle at. They're going to struggle with him being a fullback, and it goes the same with Tabai Fido and Valentine Holmes. Both of them are absolutely exceptional players. You get them in space and they're just lightning, and you just see so many teams struggle to bring him in because they're such exceptional players. And even people that don't watch much league or say to me, they're like, geez, those two blokes, geez, they're good players, eh? They're just lightning quick, and they're just so evasive. And the thing is, they're playing out of position. You play them on the wing, you get a quality fullback, they're just going to destroy for the Cowboys, and they could get them back into the 8. But I don't think the Cowboys will do much damage with them playing fullback, and that's not bagging them. It's just you can see that they've grown up on the wing and that, and they're just so good in their respective positions. They're just not good fullbacks. And I think that the Cowboys need to realise that. But going back to the Brisbane Broncos, Tessie News played at fullback this season. I'm going to be the first to admit I haven't seen much of Brisbane this year, and I haven't seen much of Tessie New. I hear he's a very good fullback. Brisbane obviously rate him, but I hope he does well. But like I said, he isn't someone that I have seen too much of, so I don't really have an opinion on him. Someone in the comments can tell me what they think. What should I be looking out for him? Is he a good fullback? Is he an average fullback? Somewhere in between. I'd be like to hear what you think of him. And I hope for his sake that he can, turn Brisbane hopes around. But let's think bigger this time. Let's think the Queensland Queensland as a whole. The Queensland fullback, Kalen Ponga, plays for Newcastle, doesn't play, did start his career at North Queensland, but he has gone to Newcastle. In my opinion, and this is not trying to be rude, disrespectful or whatever, but he is dead set got to be the most overrated player in the NRL, in my opinion. Like, I'm not trying to be harsh here, but fair income. The way the media goes on about him, it's like he's won every personal award in the game. He's won everything in the game, both personal and at clubland. And the fact is, for starters, he hasn't. And secondly, you can clearly see that he's starting to believe it. He believes in his own BS. By the way he talks in the media, the way he plays the game, and all that. You can tell that he is starting to get his into his head. He's frequently injured. Like, he only plays about half the year, if that. Majority of the time. When he does play, he only seems to have one or two good games a year, and the rest of the games he might have one or two good plays, if that, if he can be bothered in the whole game. He frequently gives off the balls to his wingers to run the ball back, because he can't be bothered running the ball back. He can't tackle. Like, I can't tell you how many times. Like, I remember it was a classic example is it was 2019, and I believe it was either 2018 or 2019. It was one of the years that the Roosters won the grand final, right? And they played the Roosters early in the year in Newcastle, and the Roosters rested Cooper Cronk, and Luke Keary got KO'd early. So both our regular halves are out, and they had to move Latrell Mitchell, who is one of the, at the time he still is one of the best centers in the game. And that, so they didn't have the regular, they're playing at 5'8", so they had him playing out of position. They had, a center playing out of playing 5'8". I think it was Mitchell Orbison was playing center, but don't quote me on that. But they had virtually the whole team playing out of position. And Newcastle ended up winning the game something like 30-6, right? And they just decimated the Roosters. And everyone was going on, how great is Kalen Ponga? He's one of the best, he's the best player in the league. Mitchell Pearce, he's come back, and then later in the year, Roosters had the full strength team in, right? Cooper Cronk's back, Luke Keary played a full game, and the Roosters just fucking destroyed them. They won something like 42-10 or something. He had an easy tackle on Luke Keary. Luke Keary made it break. He had a real easy tackle on him, side-on tackle, and he just completely missed the tackle. Didn't even look like making it. He just, and Luke Keary's not even that big a bloke. It wasn't like he was trying to tackle freaking Daniel Tupou or Jared Wira-Hargraves or Latrell Mitchell or something, who are all over 100 kilos. Luke Keary's one of the smallest blokes in the league, and he just bounced off him like he was bloody 10 foot tall and 300 kilos. And it was embarrassing. And not only that, it slowed him, but it slowed Keary down enough where the the rest of his teammates could come up and help him. But then the Roosters passed the ball along. Kalen Ponga could have rectified his mistake and run it back across and tried to make it to the middle of the field, where then Tedesco ran through. He had plenty of time, but instead he was just basically, slowly jogging back in a straight line back instead of running across field, trying to cover back and tackle, make an attempt on Tedesco. And, it was embarrassing. And, yeah, the Roosters ended up, and then all of a sudden, there's no talk about how poor defense he was. And there was plenty of games, there was just one that sticks out in my mind because I'm a Rooster supporter and I was actually at that game at the SCG where, Ponga missed an easy tackle, and I watched the other game that was in Newcastle on TV. And, he just, and there's been plenty of games since, that are just showing that, where I think there was games against Penrith as well where he was just a turnstile, he was just a speed bump. Teams were just running at him because it was equivalent of people remember what Darius Boyd was like a few years ago when he just couldn't be bothered defending. It looked like that. It literally was that bad. It's literally that bad. It's like watching Darius Boyd defending. It's that bad. And the one thing that he should have realised is that, he has a clause in his contract where if any New Zealand Super Rugby union team, in the Super Rugby come knocking, and they say, we want you to come, he has a clause in his contract that's saying that he can leave and try to make the All Blacks for the World Cup next year. He can leave the Newcastle Knights. And the fact of the matter is, who did New Zealand Rugby chase? They chased after Roger Tuivasa-Sheck because, for starters, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck has the right attitude, which Ponga doesn't. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck actually, you can put these clauses in your contract when, like Tuivasa-Sheck, you've literally won it all. Tuivasa-Sheck won a premiership at the Roosters. He won the Dally M Player of the Year. Dally M Fullback of the Year in the same year that he won the Dally M of the Year. He won the Dally M Winger of the Year when he was at the Roosters. You see this, he's captain New Zealand in rugby league. So, you can see, he'd done it all, and he had the right attitude. Tuivasa-Sheck is solid defensively. I do know that he missed a tackle in the Hurricanes game earlier this year that ended up costing them the game, but everyone misses tackles. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck has the right attitude. You'd think that Pong is younger. Got more years that he could potentially play for New Zealand Rugby. If he was that good, they would have chased him either as well as or instead of Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. But they saw that Tuivasa-Sheck had the right attitude, whereas Ponga doesn't. And you can see that he, and what really sums him up is when Nathan Brown got sacked from Newcastle. A reporter asked him that, what do you think? And what do you think about him leaving earlier in the season? And and this is someone that Ponga, Ponga said about Nathan Brown that, how much he had helped him, throughout his career. And then he just turned around, because it wasn't in a scheduled media, thing where he can, try to spin it. He goes, I don't give a shit. I'm drinking a strawberry milk, thick shake or milkshake, whatever it was. And then he had went on this whole PR, stunt, which everyone saw straight through, saying, I'm really sorry, I didn't actually mean it the way it came across. And I'm like, everyone was like, you meant it the exact way that it came out. You're all about yourself and nobody else. You don't give a shit about anybody else. And so if I was Newcastle, best thing that they could do is give him the fleek, because they're not going to improve until they do, I reckon. They're just going to struggle with him because he's just got too big a ego. And he thinks he's already all that, and he's not. And anyone that picks him up needs a head examined. the fact that, the Dolphins are reportedly offering $1.5 million, fair income, they must be bloody struggling to find players. But, going from one Queensland fullback to someone that has played a game at fullback for Queensland, he's no longer playing for Queensland, but he's still playing in the NRL. He's playing for St. George. Moses Imbai. He's a solid player, but similar to the problem that the Cowboys have had, he's not a fullback, in my opinion. I know he played fullback in one game for Queensland, but that was, I think, because someone got injured or got sick the day off the game. And he was already in the squad, so they moved him to fullback. But yeah, I can't see him. I don't see him as a fullback. I see him more as a utility, someone that can play, a little bit of hooker, a little bit of halfback, a little bit of 5'8", but, I don't think he's a fullback. And you can see, in my opinion, his confidence is getting knocked around a bit because teams are just targeting him and they're smashing him. So I think that they are going to struggle with him at fullback. Dragons are going to continue to struggle, with him at fullback. I think for both his sake and the team's sake, move him out of there and he'll be able to, be a solid player for them, but just not in the fullback position. Yeah, and then that leads me to the one last Queensland side that that I haven't spoken about. I've spoken about the Cowboys. I've spoken about other Queensland. Talking about I didn't really speak about Brisbane because I didn't know the fullback, but I've spoken about other Queensland fullbacks. But Jermaine, the last one I've got to speak about is a Titans fullback, Jerome Osako. I see him as a good player, but I see him more as a winger than a fullback. I don't really see him as a creator. I see him as more a finisher and, but he is a solid player. He seems to get a lot of hate, with people saying he's hopeless, which I think is pretty rough. I think he is a solid player. I think he is, he does a job for the team. But yeah, I think he's playing a bit out of position there. And you can see the way, the way he was treated at Brisbane and, how he got smashed there. You can see he's dented his confidence and he isn't doing as well as what he could be because his confidence is just shot. Personally, I think the best thing that Titans can do for him is put him on the wing and give him a time. And, you'll probably see that his confidence will grow. And when it does, you could potentially move him back to fullback, but I think, it'll be at his best moving to and staying on the wing. He also needs to stop switching positions. It's doing no good for him because he looks kind of lost. The coach is struggling, you can see he's struggling with what his role is. The coach isn't giving him clear directions, you can see, because this week you're playing fullback, next week you're playing on the wing, next week maybe on the wing, maybe fullback, maybe he's getting moved around too much and you can kind of see he looks a little bit lost. So yeah, I think the best thing that they can do for him is to move him permanently to the wing, and whether you move AJ Brimson or someone else a fullback, I think for his sake, I think move him to the wing. The next fullback I would like to speak about is actually the Canberra fullback, Nickel Clockster. And he is a quality fullback and is a player that is not spoken like a lot of Canberra players. For some reason, they don't seem to get spoken about much, and a lot of them are highly underrated. The only Canberra players that they get spoken about is, Papali'i and Jack Wyden. And he's not spoken about in the same levels as Turbo or Tedesco, but, he is someone that really Canberra can't do without. He played a crucial role in the Raiders making the grand final in 2019, and they would have struggled. I don't reckon they would have made it without him. Wyden and Williams and the rest of them were dominant that year, but, he played a big role, and he played his role phenomenally well, and he's always been consistent, but, he's never really spoken about, probably because Canberra has fallen down the ladder since making the grand final in 2019, and it's only really the big top stars like Wyden and Papali'i that gets spoken about in the media. But, I reckon a few clubs could do well with Nickel Cluckstar and, or a player like him, because he seems to get himself in the right positions at the right time. He seems to always be right where he needs to be. It would have been interesting to see how he would have gone with Tuivasa-Sheck, because he was at I believe he was actually at the Warriors in the lower grades before going to Canberra when Tuivasa-Sheck was there, and it would have been interesting to see how he would have linked up with Tuivasa-Sheck and now Reece Walsh, because I think he would have I reckon he would have done well, and he would have done a lot there to help take the pressure off Tuivasa-Sheck, and he would have done a lot to improve Reece Walsh, and he would have made them a lot better. But yeah, Canberra are lucky to have him, really. They'd be struggling without him, even more than what they are. The next one I would like to speak about is the South Sydney fullback, Latrell Mitchell. He's a tough one. Everyone can see he's a quality player. Everyone can see that. Anyone that knows rugby league, or even if you only know rugby union, you can see, not much about rugby league, you can see he's a quality player. And the talent there is phenomenal. But there's two things with him. He doesn't look. There's actually three things. He doesn't look fit. He tends to do stupid stuff on the field, and I see him more as a centre rather than a fullback. I know he frequently says that he wants to play fullback, but when he played at the Roosters and when he played for the Blues in Origin last year, it showed he was a centre, and he was probably the best centre in the game when he was at the Roosters. And if he wasn't the best centre, he'd definitely be in the top three. I think, the coaching staff at South need to just tell him, mate, your position's centre. You're dominant at centre at the Roosters. You're dominant in the New South Wales team as centre. You're going to be more useful to us if you play at centre rather than fullback. See him a bit like Greg Inglis. Greg Inglis was a freak at fullback, but in my opinion, Greg Inglis was a lot better at centre than he was he was a centre that could play fullback rather than a out-and-out fullback. So that's just my opinion. I think if someone's injured or something, whether it be Alex Johnson or whoever it is that is going to play fullback at South, if they're out, then I would say, have them fill in. But while those blokes are fit, and this is once he comes back from injury, of course, play him at centre, and because I think he would be a barnstorming centre at South, and I reckon, with Walker feeding him at centre, he would be destroying teams, and I reckon he could do what he did at the Roosters at South and just absolutely destroy teams. It's just, unfortunately, he just doesn't want to, and South don't want him to move. So, it is what it is, but, it's his decision and South's decision, so that's just what my opinion is. The next person I want to speak about is the Parramatta fullback, Clint Gutherson. He's a very good player that has a lot of confidence, and he inserts himself into the game whenever he can. He's just below these top quality fullbacks like Pappenhausen and Tedesco and Turbo and that. But he is what Parramatta needs at the moment. He has helped Parramatta when he left Manly. He helped Parramatta go from down near the bottom of the table to one of the top teams in the competition. He's a good ball player, and he's a strong ball runner, which has taken a lot of pressure off Mitch Moses and Dylan Brown, the Parramatta halves, which is why Parra has been near the top of the table for a couple of years now. If you can find it at the end of the season, along with Moses and Brown, they could be a real contender, because they seem, last year they were one of only two teams to beat Melbourne last year. Melbourne only lost 4 games all year, which they lost to both Penrith and Parramatta twice. Because they've got the talent to beat teams. It's just that they seem to do well through the majority of the regular season. It's just that they fade away in the last few rounds, and then they slip away in the finals. And but if they can, basically if they can continue form from where they get from round 1 to about round 20 to the final few rounds of the year as well into the finals, they can be someone that wins the grand final. Could be a bit that could be pushing for that grand final spot again and win a premiership. It's been a long time since they've won one. They haven't won it since '86. But with they could potentially win it with Gutherson. Personally, I think Gutherson needs to stop with this thing that he's $1 million a year player. Because it seems like the last couple of times that his contracts come up, he thinks that he's $1 million player. He thinks he's $1 million player. But he's just. I think he's just below that. I think he is worth about 700 to 800 a year, 7 to 800,000 a year. But I don't think he's just quite. There's only a few players that I do believe are $1 million a year players. Someone like a Cleary, a Tedesco, a Turbo. There's only a few players that are $1 million players. Gutherson isn't one of them, but he does deserve to be on $700,000 or $800,000 a year, because he is one of the top players in the Parramatta side. And the next one, fullback I want to speak about is Will Kennedy. He's a lot like Clint Gutherson in the way he plays. He does have good ball skills. He does have a good running game. He also has a good kicking. He likes to. I've seen him a few times where he's done kicks into the in goal and that. And he's very good. Got a very good short kicking game. He's a very, very good player. He's taking a lot of pressure off the Cronulla halves. Which, and it's been shown, this year when he's had Nicho Hynes come up from Melbourne. He was at Melbourne last year, Nicho Hynes, and he's come up this year, and they've won four out of the first 5 games, and you can tell that Will Kennedy's taken a lot of pressure, taking a lot of the responsibility off where, to free up Nicho Hynes to play his natural game. And you can see that they really play well off each other, Will Kennedy and Nicho Hynes. And, they could be a bit of a, do I think Cronulla can win it this year? No, but I think they could be a team that could be up near, the potentially top 4, definitely top 6, provided they keep everyone fit, especially Will Kennedy and Nicho Hynes. I reckon they could be someone that, could fly a little bit under the radar this year. They've got a new coach with Craig Fitzgibbon, so you never know. They could be someone that could cause a few upsets this year and definitely push a few teams to the limit this all the way this year. The next two players that I'm going to speak about, they're in the same boat. The first one that I'm going to speak about is Dane Laurie at the Tigers. It's hard to tell how good he actually is simply because the Tigers have been absolutely woeful for really since the last time they made the finals in 2011. So since 2012 onwards, they've been poor to shit. No other way to put it. There's been poor to shit from ever since then, and they just can't. You can't say it's hard to pick out individual players to say, are they good? Are they good? That when there's so many that are so bad, it's hard to say. But one thing I will say about him is that in a bad side, you usually have at least one or two players that are standouts, and he doesn't stand out, and Penrith let him go. So, I think it might sound a bit harsh, but he's not a standout in a bad side. It's a lot easier to stand out in a poor side than it is in a bad side, but he doesn't stand out, and I'll probably do a podcast about the Tigers at some point. I think there's a bigger problem. There's a bigger problem there than just Dane Laurie. I think the Tigers need a clean out. Personally, there's very few players that deserve to stay, in my opinion. It's hard to say with Dane Laurie, just simply because the Tigers are so bad. But, it's hard. That's all I'll say about it. They're just hard to give an opinion on. And with Matt Duffy, it's slightly different to Dane Laurie, but, I think, in my opinion, he did have, when he was at St. George, he, had quite a few good games there, and he was a solid player, but the problem is, ever since he left the Dragons, he doesn't since he's been at the Dogs, he just seems like he doesn't care. He looks like he doesn't want to get tackled anymore. He just looks like he's struggling mentally. I think someone just needs to pull him aside and have a bit of a chat to him, because the way he plays on the field, he looks like he's lost and wondering why he's there. I don't know if it has something to do with the way he left the Dragons, whether it broke him the way that he left there. But he just looks like he's struggling mentally, and he doesn't. And that's not a knock on him. He could be, you don't know what he's going, I don't know what he's going through. I don't know, he could be struggling with mental health problems or whatever. But I think he might, he kind of looks like that he doesn't want to play anymore, but the money is too good to, give up. But he needs to find that motivation again, and possibly take a little bit of time away from the game to get his head right, because I think that's the best thing he could do, just simply because he looks like he's on struggle street. That's not me making fun of him or poking fun at him or saying that he's weak. He just looks like needs a bit of time away, and needs someone to just talk to, that he can open, someone he trusts that he can speak to and help his head right, and then come back, and then you never know, he could come back better than ever. Hopefully for his sake that he can get back to the top, and hopefully for the Bulldogs' sake that they can become come back stronger than ever. Because the supporters deserve it. They've been struggling for a number of years now, the Bulldogs. And hopefully sooner or later that they get back to the near top. But yes, that is my my fullback review. I should say, not my Bulldog review, my fullback review. I'm interested to see what you think. So please give me some feedback on what you think. Do you think that my analysis of my review is solid? Do you think I'm being a bit harsh on all players, certain players? Do you think I'm being too kind to some players, while being too harsh on others? I want to know. Like, give me some feedback. Or feedback is always good. And yeah, you guys make the podcast, so I'd always tell me what you want to hear, and yeah, then I can get it on. Until next time, thanks for listening and have a good day.